Hello, I'm Michael Hainsworth. Welcome to the new normal. As the U.S. president vacillates on punishing trade tariffs, Canadians are rallying around the flag, checking the country of origin label on their groceries, and booing the American anthem at hockey games. But what can we really do to defend ourselves economically against a country 10 times our size? Meet Gary Hufbauer, a non-resident senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics, and formerly the Deputy Assistant Secretary for International Trade and Investment Policy at the US Treasury. And this is Bill Robson, President and CEO of the C.D. Howe Institute, alongside the Institute's Senior Vice President and Resident Trade and International Policy Expert, Daniel Schwanen. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Hey, Gary, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced counter tariffs, but they wouldn't be implemented all at once. What's your take on this staggered response?
Well, I think it's a good strategy for Canada because it keeps American firms off base. And if they're off base, they may lobby their Republican congressmen and senators harder to, to moderate what President Trump is doing. And remember that in the House of Representatives, which has election every 2 years, the Republicans have a very narrow majority, about 3 or 4 seats. And so this is pretty critical for House members who are in districts which are going to be affected by Canadian responses. So I think Canada's targeted it, or thinking about targeting it, with good thinking.
Bill, you and I have talked about the Team Canada response. Was this the right response from the PMO?
Well, it's part of the right response for sure, because you do have to treat this the way you would treat a trade war. Not that there's such a thing as a normal trade war, but there's kind of a toolkit that you go to when you're facing a situation like this that does involve, even though a lot of economists will say you're just making the pain worse for yourself, but it does involve some tit-for-tat responses. At the same time, we got 2 other major things to think about. The easier one, although it's funny to hear me saying it that way, is the things that Canada would need to do anyway, partly to appease the United States. I mean, getting rid of supply management is a double win because it gets rid of a major trade irritant, and it will also make for better consumer prices, more consumer variety on dairy particularly, and a more dynamic industry. So there's a list of things that I'm sure we'll touch on a few of those during the course of this conversation. But there's also this very large question of what the heck is going on in the United States, because what we're seeing on the trade front is a little bit similar to what President Trump is doing on some other fronts as well. And it's one thing if you know that it's about trade and you know there are some concessions that you can offer up and you know there's a deal to be done. But at the moment, as we look at what President Trump is doing, and this is true of a lot of things he's doing domestically as well, it's not really clear what the end game is. It's not really clear what the objective is. And that always makes it very difficult for anybody who's involved in a negotiation or a tit-for-tat retaliation, really to see clearly, is there a win? What's a loss? And how do you actually, figure out where your adversary is trying to go?
Well, Daniel, how do we define win? How do we define loss?
Well, I think, as Bill mentioned, if we retaliate, we take some additional short-term losses. There's no question about that, higher prices here. But Adam Smith himself in The Wealth of Nations said that might be necessary when the other party imposes tariffs on your products to make them see reason, bring them back to the table. And so that's definitely the first line of defense, but also offense. You got to go a little bit on the offensive. But to Bill's point about what is the end game, this is really the interesting question, because right now the White House is preparing for the review of the CUSMA, the USMCA, that's supposed to take place next year, almost as if this was business as usual. So is this to increase pressure on Canada towards this kind of reviewing the agreement? That's too optimistic a scenario maybe at this point. But what really is the end game? I think this is very important. And Canada has to be prepared for hopefully reconsidering of the entire arrangement between Canada and the United States that could benefit both parties. That's my optimistic scenario.
Gary, give us some insight into this. I'm thinking back to bullies. Specifically, my high school bully did not stop bullying me until I punched him in the nose. How do we tit for tat without making things worse, yet at the same time reminding the U.S. president that we are their biggest customer?
Well, yes, that takes some strategic thinking. And
Do we punch him in the nose?
Yeah, well, I think it seems that the Canadian and probably also the Mexican approach, if we actually have these tariffs, will be to hit very targeted industries and products. So industries which are based in Republican states or Republican districts of states. And they will have, as a result of retaliation, that is tariffs by Canada or Mexico, they will have unemployment. And then there will be certain products which are deeply loved by American consumers, which if Canada restricts exports of them, or the U.S. by its own tariff restricts imports, the price is going to go up in a way that, households which are not into this international trade lore will notice at the grocery store or at the gas pump. So that's what needs to be done. But Daniel mentioned, I think, the broader concern. What is the end game? Will the U.S. MCA survive this attack? And the reason I ask that, and it's a genuine question, is that the pretext for the attack by the U.S. is national security. But the invoking of fentanyl and illegal immigration as national security concerns really is far removed from putting tariffs on all the products from Canada and Mexico at a 25% rate. I mean, there's no connection between the offense and the response by the U.S. So if there is a national security exception in the USMCA, that's true. But this is such a, out-of-the-box, outlandish use of that it has to call into doubt whether the USMCA means anything. Can you call national security on whatever you want on Monday, Wednesday, or Friday? So that's within North America, and then the broader global system is also a system of rules, stability, predictability. That's been shaken right to the core.
So there's more to this than just the U.S. and Canada. Unfortunately, this is I think what the president has been doing with commissioning a number of reports and consultations over the coming weeks is really laying the groundwork for the if I can call it the intellectual groundwork for this agenda of, at the end of the day, we are going to impose tariffs. I'm going to find whatever excuse, and the rationale is the ultimate rationale, other than the revenue raising, is that it's going to revive U.S. industry, U.S. manufacturing, and I think there are really reasons to think this is not going to work. It's going to work completely in reverse. And then, who are they going to blame after that? So escalation is my worry as well, as thinking about a proper end game.
So when it comes to reacting to this, we've got two avenues to follow, and I suppose we're working down them concurrently, which is we'll talk to the Americans, we'll deal with the Americans, but there are all the things we can do at home to help mitigate. Now, Canadians are responding to this by saying we need to drop interprovincial trade barriers. The Institute's been calling for this for some time. Would doing so sufficiently offset the impact on Canada's economy?
Well, maybe I should have a first shot at that and say that it is quite a considerable potential boost to our GDP and our living standards if we were to make some of these internal reforms. Michael, you mentioned interprovincial trade barriers. Specifically, that's been quite well studied. And I don't know that I would say it's exactly the same magnitude, but it would be a significant offset. And if you think about some other things that we could do to enhance competitiveness within Canada, including making ourselves, strangely at this point to talk this way, but about making ourselves more open to foreign competition in some areas where we're quite closed, like telecommunications and transportation, that can do some good as well. When we talk about the types of reactions, I think it's important to distinguish some of the stuff where people seem to have said, well, we should do what we did with COVID. Again, as though this was the same kind of crisis. I don't think it is the same kind of crisis, and I don't think in retrospect that what we did with COVID was all that great. There was way too much money thrown around way too indiscriminately, and we don't want to be going down that road again. I think it's plausible to argue that some of the difficulties Canada's had over the last few years, including really low investment, really low productivity, have to do with the hangover that we gave ourselves by all those fiscal and monetary responses. What makes a lot more sense is to be thinking about the stuff, and some of it does look a little bit like what the United States is talking about, making ourselves more attractive to investment. Let's have some moves on the regulatory side. Let's cut corporate income taxes. Maybe we should have an investment tax credit. We ought to be thinking about moves like that would actually strengthen our economic base, regardless of what happens in the United States. So there are quite different bins that we can reach into when it looks for reactions. I really want to stay away from all that fiscal stimulus and monetary easing, because I don't think we need more of that. It's much more of the structural stuff and stuff that we can go on taxation that I think is more promising.
I would add to that the one thing that's going to be really, really difficult to remove is the uncertainty. So however good our policies, and as Bill says, we need to, this is a good time to re-examine them and make sure that we are attractive to investors, for example, including our own Canadian investors, just to be clear, that want to invest in Canada. A big part of the attraction over the past few decades in a number of sectors has been proximity and access to the United States. And if that's constantly put into question, right, we have a deal 4 years ago, and now we don't like it. That's going to be hard to reverse, other than strengthening maybe links with other countries. But just like internal trade, that's not going to completely offset the uncertainty of access to the U.S. market. So that's a tough nut to crack.
So Gary, let me ask you the cocktail party question. How do you see this all playing out?
Well, I don't think it's going to be the success that Trump envisages. He measures success by the stock market. And as I mentioned, the stock market has been down and then recovered a bit. But I think if he pursues this agenda of tariffs and pretty great hostility to a lot of countries, not just Canada and Mexico, but Europe is very much in his crosshairs, that cuts out the underpinnings of a lot of big multinational firms. And I could see other countries retaliating, not only in the merchandise space, which is where he's playing right now, but also in the tech space. So that's, that's Google, that's Amazon, that's Microsoft, and so on. And they can retaliate, countries can retaliate in various ways. In the extreme case, I think China could seize some of those plants that U.S. firms have. That's extreme. But all of that, to me, doesn't bode well for the stock market, which is very much on Trump's mind. Nor does it bode well for, getting the inflation down to 2% and mortgage rates down to 5%, which are kind of numbers that Americans would like to see. So to me, this is not a formula for Trump to be strong after the 2026 election. Now, it may not matter for Trump, but it certainly matters for this agenda. If this agenda doesn't pay off the way he talks about, he said, oh, no inflation, success. If that doesn't pan out, then I think his Republican successors, maybe J.D. Vance, who knows, will think twice about pursuing this line.
Regardless of where tariffs land, Trump seems to have revealed Canada's economic Achilles heel.
I was recently reading again a terrific book by Canadian historian, unfortunately Canadian historian Michael Bliss, called Northern Enterprise. And in the conclusion, it's the second last paragraph, he talks about the one thing that could doom Canada as an independent entity in the northern part of North America is a persistent and widening gap in living standards with the United States. So I very much regret that over the past decade, we didn't do a better job of supporting productivity, supporting investment, supporting high income jobs. If this is the jolt that we need to finally do a few things, and we mentioned supply management earlier, so let's come right back to it, because we didn't get a free trade agreement with the UK because of that particular thing, then that would be a bit of a silver lining here. And we certainly want, for every reason, including our ability to stand up better in the face of U.S. bullying, if it comes to that, we want that stronger economic base. So part of what's on my mind right now is we seem to have a much stronger consensus than we did before, that we should get rid of some of those interprovincial trade barriers, and supply management is a big interprovincial trade barrier all on its own. That we should do a few things on the regulatory front. We've got the opposition calling for tax cuts. It would be very good to actually seriously test ourselves. It's one thing to talk about making some of these moves. Do we actually have what it takes as a practical matter to get down to it? And if we do, it'll be a bit like the original free trade agreement. There was a lot of skepticism of free trade with the United States, but coming out of it, we were unambiguously better, which is why we're so concerned about this now. Free trade internally is just as good a thing as it would be internationally, so we should do that.
So what do you see as the long-term implications of this unnecessary trade war?
The U.S. imprint on the world scene is shrinking and will continue to shrink, and China will continue to rise.
The United States is certainly putting itself in a position where people are going to be questioning its ability to negotiate a trade agreement or any other kind of agreement and stick with it. So inevitably, I think that puts every country, including Canada, in a bit more position about thinking how it's going to make itself stronger in a situation where you might be going it alone more than you hoped.
The crisis is an opportunity for us to review our priorities, frankly. Including infrastructure, and make sure that we, and internal trade agreements, make sure that we are less entirely dependent on the U.S. market.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time and your insight today.
Thank you, Michael. And Gary, very nice to be talking.
Great to see you too.
Good to see you, Gary.
Almost in person. Thanks.
Yeah. Take care.
Gary Hufbauer is a non-resident senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics and formerly the Deputy Assistant Secretary for International Trade and Investment Policy at the US Treasury. Bill Robson is President and CEO of the C.D. Howe Institute. Daniel Schwanen is the Institute's Senior Vice President and resident trade and international policy expert. For further insight into the impact Trump's trade policies will have on Canada, what we can do in return, and how we should diversify our trade, visit cdhowe.org. I'm Michael Hainsworth. Thanks for joining us.
You've been listening to the C.D. Howe Institute podcast with Michael Hainsworth. Subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, and Spotify. The C.D. Howe Institute is an independent, not-for-profit research institute whose mission is to raise living standards by fostering economically sound public policies. The Institute is widely considered to be Canada's most influential think tank and a trusted source of essential policy intelligence, distinguished by nonpartisan, evidence-based research and subject to definitive expert review. Visit cdhow.org and follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn. Thank you.